king and the 3 wise men. There once was a powerful king who ruled over 4 kingdoms, one located in the east and 3 across the ocean in the west. Now the king had everything that his heart desired, but he lacked one thing. The king had 3 daughters and no son to take his name and sit upon his throne. So the king purposed in his heart to find husbands for his daughters in hopes that they may bring him a grandson to continue his legacy and sit upon his throne. The king then called for 3 of the finest and wisest young men in his kingdom and gave each man a number of large sacks and informed the men to go out and fill the sacks with fruits and vegetables, then meet him back by the end of the week. The 3 men were confused as to why they were called and for what purpose were they to fill the sacks with fruits and vegetables, but they took the sacks and proceeded to do exactly as the king had informed them. Now, the first young man said to himself, "I'm gathering fruits and vegetables for the king, so everything I put into these sacks must be fit for a king." So he traveled far and wide, and the young man spared no expense in his search for the best fruits and vegetables he could find. Pre-adventure, the king would decide to eat of his findings, he would be impressed. Now the second young man said to himself, "I'm gathering fruits and vegetables for the king. Surely he won't waste time rumbling through these sacks, so I'll fill them halfway with rotten fruit and pour good fruits and vegetables on the top." Pre-adventure. The king would see the good fruit on top and be satisfied. And finally, the third young man said to himself, "I'm gathering fruits and vegetables for the king, and he would never eat, let alone touch the food of us common folks." So he proceeded to fill his sacks with dirt, leaves, and stones. Pre-adventure, the king would see that his sacks were full and be satisfied. At the end of 7 days, the 3 young men grabbed their sacks and headed to the king to present themselves as they were commanded. Once the men were settled before the throne, the king began to say, "Men, I have called you here because you are the finest and wisest young men in all of my kingdom. As you know, I also rule 3 other kingdoms across the ocean to the west, and the king has been very prosperous in every way but one. The king have 3 daughters and no son to take his name and sit upon his throne. One of my daughters live in each of the 3 kingdoms across the sea, and I have chosen you 3 young men to marry my daughters in hopes that you may rear me up a grandson to take on my name and sit upon my throne. I had you fill these sacks with fruits and vegetables because the journey is 2 months by ship, and you'll need the food to eat along the way. May you be at peace on your journey, and I'll see you soon." The first young man immediately grabbed his sacks and loaded the ship. The next 2 months felt like he was in paradise, riding on the open sea and enjoying the best food money could buy. When the journey was complete, his countenance was bright, and he looked very healthy and handsome. This pleased the princess, and she happily gave him her hand in marriage. In a year's time, the princess gave birth to a healthy baby boy, and when the king heard the news, he was so excited he exalted the young man to sit upon the throne of one of his kingdoms. The second young man was very optimistic that he could complete the journey. He knew that he could survive for a month and was in high hopes that he could stretch the food over the entire trip. After about a month and a half, the good fruits and vegetables were all gone, and the young man became very hungry. 2 more days had passed, and he couldn't withstand the hunger pains any longer, so he started to eat the rotten food. The next day, he grew very ill, and the sickness became worse as the days progressed. When the journey was complete, and it was time to unboard the ship, the young man looked so bad that he wasn't allowed anywhere near the princess. When the king found out what was done, the young man was sentenced to 10 years hard labor, and after his time was fulfilled, he was sent back to live the rest of his days in shame. When it was time for the third young man to board the ship, he hesitated because he knew that he only had dirt and rocks in his sacks. But he went aboard anyway, for fear that he would be brought back before the king, and then straight to the dungeon. He managed to make it through 7 days, but on the 8th, he could no longer stand. All of his strength was gone. He started experiencing extreme muscle spasms, cramps, and dizziness. A paralyzing fear overtook him because all he could think was that he'd done this to himself. If only he knew the food that was gathered for the king would be the food he would need to survive. He would have made sure to gather only the best, but instead, he's forced to eat the fruit of his own manipulating ways. What could have been a blessing became a curse, and he had no one to blame but himself. The moral of the story is, always do unto others as you would have them do unto you, because the same energy you put out, whether good or bad, will eventually find its way back to you.